Kessa stood in the waiting area of the Galactic Employment Center for what felt like the 100th time that month. Her single hand gripped the worn data pad that held her engineering credentials while her daughter Mira sat quietly beside her, swinging her small legs from the too-tall chair. The other job seekers in the room kept their distance. Some stared at the empty space where Kessa's right arm should have been. Others looked away quickly when they noticed the scarred tissue covering the left side of her face, or the medical patch where her left eye had once been. A Draxian family moved 3 seats farther away when Kessa shifted in her chair. The mother pulled her children close and whispered something that made them stare with wide eyes. Kessa had learned to ignore such reactions over the past 8 months since arriving at Port Ganymede Station. The war that destroyed her home world had taken more than her arm and eye. It had taken her husband, her home, and apparently her ability to be seen as anything other than damaged goods. Applicant Kessa of Velthan, please proceed to interview room 7, the automated voice announced through the speakers. Kessa stood and smoothed her worn interview clothes with her remaining hand. She had practiced this movement many times to make it look natural and confident. Mira hopped down from her chair and looked up at her mother with hopeful eyes. "Wait here, little star," Kessa said softly in their native language. "I will be back soon." "Will they give you a job this time, Mama?" Mira asked. "Perhaps," Kessa replied, though her heart carried little hope. This would be her 47th interview since their arrival on the station. The interview room was small and sterile. A consortium representative sat behind a desk, her 4 arms moving efficiently across multiple data screens at once. She was a Quellan, a species known for their multitasking abilities and business efficiency. The representative barely looked up when Kessa entered. "Sit," the Quellan said without warmth. Kessa sat in the chair across from the desk and placed her data pad on the surface between them. The representative finally looked at her directly. Kessa watched the familiar sequence of reactions play across the alien's face. First, the widening of eyes. Then the quick glance at the missing arm. Finally, the almost invisible backward lean that every interviewer seemed to do when they saw her damaged face. "Your credentials say you have 15 years of experience in ship systems engineering," the representative said, her voice now carrying a tone of doubt. "Class 7 certification in environmental controls and Class 6 in propulsion systems." "Yes," Kessa replied. "I worked for the Velthani Defense Fleet before the war. I maintained and repaired military vessels. I also have experience with civilian cargo ships and passenger transports." The representative's fingers tapped across her screens, pulling up information. "The Velthani Fleet. Yes, I see that here." Those credentials would normally be quite valuable. She paused and Kessa felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming. However, this position requires interaction with clients. You would need to inspect their vessels, discuss repair needs, and provide estimates. "I can do all of those things," Kessa said, keeping her voice steady. "My injury does not affect my technical knowledge or my ability to communicate." "I am sure you believe that," the Quellan said in a tone that suggested she did not agree. "But you must understand our position. Our clients expect a certain level of professionalism. They expect engineers who present a proper image. Someone who looks." She gestured vaguely with one of her 4 hands. "Whole." The word hit Kessa like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I assure you I am perfectly capable of performing any engineering task required. I have adapted my techniques to work with one hand. I can provide references from my previous positions." "From before the war," the representative said. "Those positions no longer exist. The Velthani fleet is destroyed. There is no one to verify your claims." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to what might have been meant as kindness. "I am being honest with you because I think someone should be. You need to understand that your appearance is a significant barrier. Clients will be uncomfortable. They will question your abilities. Some will refuse to work with you entirely. It is not personal. It is simply business reality." "Then let me prove myself," Kessa said, hearing the desperation creep into her voice despite her efforts to control it. "Give me a trial period. I will work for reduced pay. Just give me a chance to show what I can do." The Quellan's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I am sorry. The Galactic Consortium has standards to maintain. We cannot take such risks with our reputation. Perhaps you should consider other options. There are shelter positions available. Care facilities for other refugees. Jobs that do not require client interaction." "I am an engineer," Kessa said quietly. "I have spent 15 years learning my profession. I do not want to sort supplies in a warehouse." "Then I suggest you consider cosmetic reconstruction," the representative said, already turning her attention back to her screens. Save your credits and pay for prosthetics. A replacement arm, an artificial eye, some skin grafting. Once you look more presentable, opportunities will improve. Until then. She made a dismissive gesture with two of her hands. I am afraid I cannot help you. Kessa wanted to argue. She wanted to demand fairness, to insist that her skills should matter more than her appearance. But she had learned that such arguments changed nothing. The representative had already moved on to the next file on her screen, dismissing Kessa as completely as if she had never existed. Back in the waiting area, Mira looked up with those hopeful eyes again. Kessa forced a smile and took her daughter's hand. They walked out of the employment center into the busy corridors of Port Ganymede Station. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved past them, all hurrying to their jobs, their homes, their lives. Kessa and Mira had no such destination. Their shelter assignment was a small room in the refugee quarter, barely large enough for 2 sleeping mats and a storage unit. The Refugee Assistance Program provided basic food rations and the shelter space, but that assistance was scheduled to end in 3 weeks. After that, they would have nothing. No income, no home, no hope. Kessa sat on her sleeping mat that night while Mira slept beside her. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The scarred face looked back at her, the medical patch covering the ruined eye socket, the empty sleeve of her shirt pinned up where her arm had been. She had been beautiful once, or at least normal. Now she was something that made others uncomfortable, something to be hidden away and forgotten. 47 rejections. 47 times she had been told she was not good enough, not whole enough, not presentable enough. How many more rejections could she endure? How much longer could she keep hope alive for Myra's sake? Tomorrow she would try again. She would submit more applications, attend more interviews, face more uncomfortable stares and polite rejections. What else could she do? Giving up meant accepting that she and Mira had no future. As long as she still had breath in her body and strength in her remaining arm, she would keep trying. But tonight, in the darkness of their tiny shelter, Kessa allowed herself to feel the weight of her despair. Kessa sat on a bench in the central plaza of Port Ganymede Station, watching Mira chase the floating light orbs that drifted through the public space. The artificial lights were meant to entertain children while their parents conducted business, and Mira laughed as she jumped to touch them. It was a sound Kessa heard less and less these days. 3 more rejections had come that morning. 2 employers had not even granted her an interview after seeing her appearance through the video screen. The third had ended the meeting within 5 minutes, citing concerns about safety regulations for disabled workers. Kessa had stopped arguing that she was not disabled, merely different. No one wanted to hear it. Her data pad showed the dwindling balance in her refugee assistance account. 12 days remained before the credits stopped coming. 12 days to find employment, or she and Mira would be homeless on a station where homeless refugees rarely survived long. You look like you could use some good news, a voice said in standard galactic. Kessa looked up to see a human standing beside the bench. He was middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and the kind of worn work clothes that suggested he spent more time in engine rooms than offices. A tool belt hung at his waist, and his hands showed the calluses and small scars of someone who worked with machinery regularly. I am not interested in charity, Kessa said automatically, assuming he was another well-meaning volunteer from one of the refugee aid organizations. The human laughed. Good, because I am not offering any. I am Gary Sullivan. I run a cargo and repair operation out of Dock 17. I have 3 ships and more work than I can handle. He gestured at the data pad in Kessa's hand. That looks like a job search interface. You looking for work? Kessa hesitated. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago, and most species still considered them unpredictable and strange. But their reputation for directness was well known. Yes, she said. I am looking for engineering work. What kind of engineering? Gary asked, sitting down on the bench without invitation. Ship systems. Environmental controls, propulsion, power distribution. I have 15 years of experience. Kessa recited her qualifications automatically, though she expected the same result as always. Gary nodded, his eyes scanning her face with interest rather than discomfort. 15 years is solid. Got credentials I can verify? Kessa handed him her data pad, waiting for the moment when he would notice her missing arm, her scarred face, her ruined eye. Waiting for the polite excuse that would end this conversation like all the others. Gary studied the screen, scrolling through her work history and certifications. His eyebrows rose. Class 7 environmental certification? That is impressive. Most engineers I meet are class 4 at best. He looked up at her. You worked on military vessels? Before the war destroyed my home world, yes, Kessa said. The Velthani conflict, Gary said, nodding. I heard about that. Brutal situation. His eyes finally registered her injuries, but his expression did not change. He simply looked back at the data pad. So you can diagnose and repair ship systems? Life support, climate control, that sort of thing? Yes, Kessa said, confused by his lack of reaction to her appearance. What about propulsion? I have a cargo hauler with a temperamental plasma drive. 3 mechanics have looked at it, and none of them can figure out why it keeps overheating. Kessa found herself leaning forward despite her caution. Plasma drives overheat for several common reasons. Insufficient coolant flow, degraded heat exchangers, or misaligned containment fields. Have they checked the field generator alignment? They said everything was aligned perfectly, Gary replied. Then they measured wrong, Kessa said with certainty. Plasma drives are sensitive. Even a 0.02 degree misalignment can cause heat buildup over time. The problem shows up gradually, not immediately, so many mechanics miss it. Gary smiled. See, that is exactly the kind of knowledge I need. Can you start tomorrow? Kessa stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Start what? Working for me. I need a good engineer. You clearly know your stuff. Pay is standard station rate for certified engineers, plus a bonus for any repairs completed ahead of schedule. Gary stood up and extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. You want to hire me? Kessa said, still not believing it. That is generally what happens when an employer offers someone a job, Gary said with amusement in his voice. But. Kessa gestured at her face, her missing arm. You can see that I am damaged. I cannot do many tasks that require 2 hands. Clients will be uncomfortable around me. Other employers have explained this to me many times. Gary looked genuinely puzzled. Can you fix ships or not? Yes, but. Then what is the problem? Gary interrupted. I need someone who can fix ships. You can fix ships. Seems pretty straightforward to me. A Quellan merchant who had been passing by stopped and addressed Gary in a concerned tone. Human Sullivan, I feel obligated to warn you. This Velthani is severely damaged. She will frighten your clients. She cannot perform physical tasks properly with only one arm. You should reconsider this decision. Gary turned to face the Quellan with a pleasant smile that somehow carried an edge of steel. With respect, I did not ask for your opinion about my hiring decisions. Kessa here has better credentials than anyone else I have interviewed this month. If my clients have a problem with her appearance, they can take their ships somewhere else. The Quellan's multiple arms gestured in agitation. You are making a business mistake. Image matters. Presentation matters. This refugee will cost you contracts. Maybe, Gary said with a shrug. But I doubt it. Most of my clients care whether their ships run properly, not what the engineer looks like while fixing them. He turned back to Kessa. So, you want the job or not? Kessa felt Myra's hand slip into hers. Her daughter had finished playing with the light orbs and was watching the conversation with wide eyes. Mama, is the human giving you a job? Mira whispered in Velthani. I think so, Kessa whispered back, still trying to process what was happening. She looked at Gary Sullivan, this strange human who seemed utterly unbothered by the injuries that had made her unemployable for 8 months. Why? She finally asked. Why would you hire me when everyone else refuses? Gary tilted his head, considering the question. I grew up on Earth, in a place where people got judged for all kinds of stupid reasons. Color of their skin, where they were born, who they loved, what god they prayed to. Learned pretty early that none of that mattered as much as whether someone could do the job. He gestured at the busy plaza around them. Seems like the galaxy has the same problem. Everyone worrying about appearances instead of abilities. He pulled a data card from his pocket and handed it to Kessa. This has the dock location and my contact information. Show up tomorrow at 0800 hours. Wear clothes you do not mind getting dirty. First task is diagnosing that plasma drive problem. He smiled. And bring your daughter if you need to. I have a small office with a rest area. She can do schoolwork there while you work. Gary walked away before Kessa could respond, disappearing into the crowd of station traffic. Kessa looked down at the data card in her hand, then at Myra's hopeful face. Did we get lucky, Mama? Mira asked. Kessa felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. Yes, little star, she said softly. I think perhaps we did. Kessa arrived at Dock 17 precisely at 0800 hours the next morning. Mira walked beside her, clutching a small bag with her schoolwork and a lunch that Kessa had carefully rationed from their remaining food credits. The dock was smaller than the corporate facilities Kessa had interviewed at, but it was clean and well organized. 3 ships sat in various states of repair, and she could hear the sound of tools and machinery from inside the main bay. Gary emerged from the office area, wiping his hands on a cloth. Right on time. Good. Let me show you around. He led them through the facility, pointing out the tool storage, the parts inventory, and the diagnostic equipment. Everything was human-made, which meant Kessa would need to learn new interfaces, but the basic principles remained the same across all species. Mira can stay in here, Gary said, opening a door to a small room with a desk, a comfortable chair, and a view of the dock through a window. I use it for paperwork, but I mostly hate paperwork, so it sits empty most days. There is a food dispenser that works, and the bathroom is just next door. Mira looked at Kessa for permission. Kessa nodded, and her daughter immediately settled at the desk, pulling out her study tablet. Gary led Kessa to the cargo hauler with the problematic plasma drive. 3 mechanics have looked at this, Gary said. They all say the alignment is perfect, but the drive still overheats every 6 hours of operation. Client is ready to scrap the whole propulsion system and install a new one, but that costs a fortune. Kessa circled the ship slowly, studying its design. It was a Corvin-built vessel about 30 years old. She ducked under the hull access panel and pulled herself up into the maintenance crawlspace with her single arm. The movement was awkward but practiced. She had learned to use her legs and core strength to compensate for the missing limb. Inside the cramped space, she examined the plasma drive housing. She pulled a diagnostic scanner from her tool belt and ran it along the field generator array. The readings appeared normal at first, but Kessa had learned to look deeper. She adjusted the scanner sensitivity and ran it again. There. A microscopic fluctuation in the 3rd generator, so small that standard diagnostic tools would miss it completely. Found it, she called out to Gary. She heard him climbing up behind her. The space was barely large enough for one person, let alone 2. What is it? He asked. The 3rd field generator has a microfracture in its core casing, Kessa explained. It is not enough to cause immediate failure, but it creates a tiny variance in the containment field. Over time, that variance compounds and causes uneven heat distribution. She pointed at the readings on her scanner. See this fluctuation? It happens every 2.3 seconds. Most mechanics would ignore it as normal operational variance. But it is not normal, Gary said. No. It is the drive slowly destroying itself. Kessa pulled herself out of the crawlspace. The generator needs to be replaced. The part costs about 1/10 of what a full propulsion system replacement would cost. Gary grinned. That is exactly what I needed to hear. Can you do the replacement? Yes. It will take about 4 hours. The other mechanics said it would take 2 days minimum, Gary said. Kessa shrugged. They were probably planning to replace more parts than necessary. I only need to swap the damaged generator. She completed the repair in 3.5 hours. Working with one arm required creative problem solving. She used magnetic clamps to hold components in place while she worked, and she had learned to brace tools against her body or the ship's structure when she needed leverage. Gary watched with interest, occasionally handing her tools but mostly staying out of her way. When the plasma drive powered up without overheating, Gary actually laughed with delight. Perfect. The client is going to be very happy. He paused. Well, maybe. He might have some opinions about you. The client arrived 2 hours later. He was a Draxian cargo hauler, large and imposing with thick scaled skin and multiple eyes. He took one look at Kessa and his face twisted with disgust. This is the engineer who repaired my ship? He demanded. This damaged creature? This is Kessa, Gary said calmly. She diagnosed and fixed your plasma drive problem in under 4 hours. The issue was a microfractured field generator. She replaced it and your ship is ready to fly. The Draxian's eyes narrowed. I do not believe that wreck could fix anything. You are trying to deceive me. Gary's expression remained pleasant, but his voice gained a hard edge. My engineer found a problem that 3 others missed. She completed a repair that would have cost you 10 times as much if you had followed their advice. Now you can either accept that your ship is fixed and pay the invoice, or you can insult her again and find somewhere else to take your business. The Draxian looked between Gary and Kessa, clearly unused to being challenged. I want to inspect the repair myself. Be my guest, Gary said. The client climbed into the maintenance crawlspace and spent 20 minutes examining Kessa's work. When he emerged, his expression had shifted from disgust to confusion. The repair is flawless, he admitted grudgingly. The generator has been replaced correctly. The calibration is perfect. Told you, Gary said. The Draxian paid his invoice without another word, but Kessa noticed him glancing at her several times before he left. Not with disgust anymore, but with something closer to bewilderment, as if he could not reconcile her appearance with her obvious skill. Over the following weeks, similar scenes played out again and again. Clients would arrive, see Kessa, and express doubt or disgust. Gary would defend her with calm confidence. Kessa would perform repairs that others had declared impossible or too difficult. Slowly, grudgingly, the clients began to accept her presence. Mira thrived during this time. Gary had enrolled her in the human education program on the station, which welcomed students of all species. The human teachers did not treat Mira differently because of her mother's injuries. They simply taught her mathematics and language and science alongside human children and other alien students. Mira began to smile more often, to laugh freely the way she had before the war. The turning point came when a major shipping company's vessel suffered a critical malfunction while docked at Port Ganymede. The ship's main environmental control system had failed, and the crew was evacuating while mechanics tried to identify the problem. The company's representative, a wealthy Corvan merchant named Drell, brought the ship to Gary's dock as a last resort. "I need this fixed immediately," Drell said. "My cargo is worth millions of credits and it will spoil if the climate control remains offline. Every other repair facility on this station has told me it will take days to diagnose the problem." Gary looked at Kessa. "Can you take a look?" Kessa boarded the ship and made her way to the environmental control center. The system was completely dead, showing no power flow at all. She began tracing the power conduits, checking connections and relays. 3 hours into her investigation, she found the problem buried deep in the ship's infrastructure. A junction box had corroded from the inside, creating a break in the power flow that was nearly impossible to detect because the corrosion was hidden behind the box's housing. She returned to where Gary and Drell were waiting. "I found it. Corroded junction box in section 12. I can replace it and restore power in 2 hours." Drell stared at her. 2 hours? That is impossible. The mechanics I consulted said this could take days. "They were looking in the wrong places," Kessa said simply. "The failure point is not where they expected it to be." She completed the repair in 1 hour and 45 minutes. When the environmental controls came back online and the climate stabilized, Drell stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to Gary. "I was wrong about her," Drell said quietly. "I thought you were a fool for hiring a damaged refugee. But she just saved me from losing my entire cargo." He looked directly at Kessa. "You have my respect, engineer. And my business." Word spread after that. The one-armed, one-eyed Velthani engineer at Dock 17 could solve problems that defeated other mechanics. She worked faster, diagnosed better, and never failed to deliver results. Clients stopped complaining about her appearance. Some even requested her specifically. Kessa felt something she had not felt since before the war. Pride in her work. Value in her skills. A future that extended beyond mere survival. The alarm started during the middle of Kessa's shift. Not the usual warning tones that indicated minor problems, but the deep, pulsing wail that meant station-wide emergency. Kessa looked up from the power coupling she was repairing as Gary rushed into the bay, his face pale. "Environmental failure in the human residential sector," he said, pulling up a station schematic on his data pad. "Something has gone wrong with the atmosphere processing system. The air is turning toxic." Kessa set down her tools and moved to look at the display. The human sector housed nearly 800 people, most of them workers and their families. Red warning indicators covered the entire section on the map. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that they are ordering evacuation," Gary said. "The system is pumping contaminated air instead of clean air. Some kind of chemical leak in the processing plant. They are saying people have maybe 2 hours before the concentration becomes lethal." Through the dock window, Kessa could see the chaos beginning. Humans were streaming out of their residential area, carrying children and belongings, heading for the emergency shelters in the neutral zones. Station security was trying to maintain order, but panic was spreading. Gary's communication device buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, then his expression grew darker. "They cannot shut down the contaminated flow. The system controls are not responding. Someone needs to go into the processing plant and manually override the system, but the contamination is already too heavy. The repair teams cannot get close without full hazard suits, and the narrow access passages are too small for standard suits." Kessa studied the schematic more carefully. She recognized the design. It was a Corvan atmospheric processor, similar to systems she had worked on during her military service. Where exactly is the override mechanism located? Gary zoomed in on the map. Here in the central processing core. But look at the access route. You have to crawl through these maintenance shafts to reach it. The shafts are barely wide enough for one person, and the air inside is already heavily contaminated. What is the contamination? Kessa asked. Chlorine-based compound, Gary read from his device. Highly toxic to most species. Fatal to humans within minutes at current concentration levels. Kessa felt her heart begin to race, but not from fear. From possibility. Velthani physiology can tolerate chlorine exposure for limited periods. Our respiratory system evolved on a world with volcanic activity. We can filter certain toxins that would kill other species. Gary looked at her sharply. How limited are we talking? Perhaps 30 minutes before serious damage occurs. Maybe longer if the concentration is not too high. Kessa pointed at the narrow maintenance shafts on the display. And those passages are small. Someone with a bulky frame or two arms would struggle to maneuver through them quickly. Understanding dawned on Gary's face, followed immediately by concern. No, absolutely not. I am not sending you into a toxic death trap. You are not sending me anywhere, Kessa said calmly. I am volunteering. Those shafts are too narrow for someone in a hazard suit. They need someone small, someone who can move quickly through tight spaces, and someone whose biology can survive the contamination long enough to complete the repair. You only have one arm, Gary protested. What if you need both hands to operate the override? Then I will find another way, Kessa said. I always do. A Quellan supervisor arrived at the dock moments later, accompanied by two Draxian engineers in partial protective gear. We are commandeering all available engineers for the emergency response, the supervisor announced. We need everyone who can help. I can reach the override, Kessa said immediately. The supervisor looked at her and dismissed her just as quickly. Impossible. You are damaged. You could not possibly navigate the maintenance shafts or operate the controls effectively. She is the only one who can, Gary said firmly. The shafts are too narrow for standard hazard suits. Kessa's biology can tolerate the chlorine exposure, and her size allows her to move through confined spaces. One of the Draxian engineers shook his massive head. This is foolish. The contamination will kill her before she reaches the override. We should focus on evacuating everyone and sealing off the sector. And abandon 800 people's homes? Gary said. Everything they own? Not to mention the structural damage that level of contamination will cause if it is not stopped. The supervisor's multiple arms gestured in frustration. Even if she reaches the override, can she operate it? The mechanism requires specific technical knowledge. I have worked on Corvin atmospheric systems before, Kessa said. I know the override procedures. The supervisor looked like she wanted to argue further, but another alarm sounded. The contamination levels were rising faster than predicted. Fine, she said. If you want to risk your life for humans who are not even your species, that is your choice. But I am noting in the official record that I advised against this. Kessa turned to Gary. Mira is in your office. If something happens to me... Nothing is going to happen to you, Gary interrupted. You are going to get in there, fix the problem and get out. And then I am giving you a raise. Kessa managed a small smile. She looked through the window toward Gary's office where Mira sat doing her schoolwork, unaware of the danger. Take care of her if I do not return. You are going to return, Gary said with absolute certainty. You are the best engineer on this station. This is just another repair. The entrance to the maintenance shaft system was in a service corridor near the processing plant. Kessa could smell the chlorine before she even reached it. The sharp, burning scent made her eyes water, but her respiratory system began automatically adjusting, filtering the contamination as her body had evolved to do. The shaft entrance was a narrow opening, barely 60 centimeters wide. Kessa could see the pale yellow-green haze of contaminated air drifting inside. She checked her toolkit one final time, making sure every tool was secured to her belt. Then she pulled herself into the shaft. The space was even tighter than it had appeared from outside. Kessa had to pull herself forward using her single arm while pushing with her legs. The metal walls pressed against her shoulders. The contaminated air burned her throat and lungs, but she kept moving. Her Velthani physiology worked to neutralize the poison, but she could feel the strain. She did not have much time. The shaft branched 3 times before reaching the central processing core. Each time, Kessa had to consult the mental map she had memorized, choosing the correct path without hesitation. Getting lost in here would mean death. Her arm began to ache from pulling her weight through the narrow passage. Sweat mixed with the chemical haze, making her skin burn. But finally she saw the access panel that led to the override chamber. The panel was designed to be opened with 2 hands. Kessa wedged her shoulder against the wall for leverage and used her single hand to turn the release mechanism. It took 3 attempts, each one weaker than the last as the contamination began to overwhelm even her resistant physiology. But the panel finally gave way. The override chamber was a small room filled with control systems. Kessa pulled herself inside and immediately located the primary override console. The contamination was thickest here, right at the source of the leak. Her vision began to blur. Her lungs burned with every breath. The override required a specific sequence of commands. Kessa's fingers moved across the controls, executing the procedure she had memorized years ago during her military training. Shut down main flow. Activate emergency scrubbers. Redirect contaminated air to filtration. Purge the system. The console screens flickered as the commands registered. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the contamination alarms changed their tone. The flow of toxic air stopped. The emergency filtration system engaged with a deep humming sound. Kessa tried to move back toward the maintenance shaft, but her body refused to cooperate. She had been inside the contaminated area for too long. Her respiratory filters were overwhelmed. She collapsed against the wall, struggling to breathe, wondering if she would die here in this small room after all. Then hands grabbed her. Strong human hands pulling her back through the access panel. Gary had followed her into the shaft wearing an emergency respirator. He dragged her through the narrow passage, moving faster than should have been possible in the confined space. Other hands waited at the exit, pulling them both out into clean air. Medical teams surrounded Kessa immediately. They placed a breathing mask over her face and administered treatments for chemical exposure. Through her blurred vision, she saw Gary standing nearby, his face streaked with sweat and determination. The override worked, someone was saying. The contamination is clearing. The residential sector is safe. Kessa closed her eyes and let the medical team work. She had done it. 800 humans would keep their homes. And perhaps more importantly, she had proven something to herself. Her damaged body was not a weakness. It was simply different, and sometimes, different was exactly what the situation required. Kessa woke in the medical center 3 days after the environmental crisis. Her lungs still ached and her throat felt raw, but the doctors assured her the damage was temporary. She would make a full recovery. Mira sat beside her bed, holding her hand with both of her small ones. "Mama, everyone is talking about you," Mira said in their native language. "They say you are a hero." "I am not a hero," Kessa replied softly. "I am just an engineer who did her job." "The humans say you saved their lives," Mira insisted. "They keep coming to ask about you. Gary has been turning them away so you can rest." As if summoned by his name, Gary appeared in the doorway carrying a container of what smelled like soup. "You are awake. Good. The doctor said you needed to eat when you woke up." He set the container on the bedside table. "Also, the station commander wants to see you. I told him you needed to recover first, but he is pretty insistent." "What does he want?" Kessa asked. Gary smiled. "To thank you publicly, apparently. There is going to be some kind of ceremony." 2 days later, Kessa stood on a platform in the central plaza where she had once sat in despair, searching for work. Now thousands of station residents filled the space, representing dozens of species. The station commander, a dignified Corvin named Threll, stood beside her at the podium. "This station nearly lost 800 residents to a catastrophic failure," Commander Threll announced to the crowd. "Our own repair teams declared the situation impossible. The contamination was too severe, the access points too narrow, the risk too high." He turned to Kessa. "One individual volunteered to enter that toxic environment when no one else could. Kessa of Velthan, a refugee who many dismissed as damaged and unemployable, saved lives through courage and skill that few could match." The crowd applauded. Kessa felt uncomfortable with the attention, but she stood quietly while the commander continued. "I am authorized to offer you a position as Chief Environmental Engineer for Port Ganymede Station, with full benefits and housing in the premium sector." The offer was generous. More generous than Kessa had ever imagined receiving. It was everything she had desperately needed just months ago. But as she looked out at the crowd, she found Gary standing near the front with Mira on his shoulders so she could see. Gary gave her a questioning look, and she knew he would support whatever decision she made. "Thank you, Commander," Kessa said. "I am honored by your offer. But I already have employment. Gary Sullivan gave me a chance when no one else would. I will not abandon him now. Gary's face broke into a wide grin. Commander Threll looked surprised but nodded with respect. Then perhaps we can discuss contracting your services for station maintenance when needed. At premium rates, of course. After the ceremony, the offers began arriving. Wealthy merchants wanted to hire her exclusively for their fleets. Major corporations sent recruitment messages. Even the Galactic Consortium, which had rejected her so coldly months before, contacted her with apologies and employment opportunities. Kessa turned them all down. You could be rich, Gary said one evening as they sat in his office reviewing another recruitment offer. These companies are offering 3 times what I can pay you. You gave me something more valuable than money, Kessa replied. You gave me dignity. You saw my skills when everyone else saw only my scars. I will not forget that. Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a legal document. I have been thinking about expanding the business. Taking on more complex contracts now that we have the reputation for solving impossible problems. But I cannot do it alone. He slid the document across to her. I want you as a full partner. Equal ownership, equal decision-making, equal profits. Kessa stared at the partnership agreement, unable to speak. You have earned it, Gary said simply. This business would not be what it is without you. Kessa signed the document with her single hand, feeling tears she could not quite control. Thank you, she whispered. The expansion happened quickly. Gary and Kessa moved the operation to a larger facility with room for more ships and equipment. But more importantly, they began receiving applications from refugees who had heard about Kessa's story. Refugees with injuries, disabilities, or simply appearances that made other employers uncomfortable. A Draxian veteran arrived with severe burn scars covering half his body. Kessa interviewed him herself and hired him immediately when he demonstrated his knowledge of power systems. A young Quellan who had lost 2 of her 4 arms in an accident became their inventory manager, developing an organizational system more efficient than anything they had used before. A human with a degenerative condition that left him in a mobility chair proved to be exceptional at diagnostic work. Other employers on the station complained that Gary was running a charity operation. He ignored them. The results spoke for themselves. Sullivan and Kessa Engineering, as the business was now called, had the lowest failure rate and fastest turnaround time of any repair operation on Port Ganymede. Clients who initially objected to working with disabled engineers changed their minds after experiencing the quality of work. Some even admitted they had been wrong to judge based on appearance. You are changing minds, Gary told Kessa one day as they reviewed their growing list of contracts. We are changing minds, Kessa corrected him. This only works because you believed first. Mira grew taller and more confident. She made friends at the human school, bringing them home to meet her mother without embarrassment or shame. Kessa watched her daughter laugh freely, play without fear, and dream about her future without the weight of despair that had crushed them both during those early months on the station. One evening, Kessa found Mira studying a technical manual about ship systems. What are you reading, little star? She asked. I want to be an engineer like you, Mama, Mira said. I want to fix things that other people say cannot be fixed. Kessa felt her heart swell with pride. Then I will teach you everything I know. 6 months after the environmental crisis, Kessa stood in the dock watching a new recruit, a Velthani refugee like herself, work on her first repair. The young woman had lost both legs in the same war that had taken Kessa's arm and eye. She moved through the ship using prosthetic limbs and a remarkable adaptation technique, completing the repair efficiently despite her differences. Gary walked up beside Kessa. 23 employees now, he said. All of them people that other companies rejected. And we have more work than we can handle. You started something important, Kessa said. You showed that capability matters more than appearance. That different does not mean broken. We started something important, Gary corrected with a smile. I just asked if you could fix ships. You proved what was possible. Kessa thought about that first day sitting in the plaza with no hope and no future. She thought about Gary approaching her with a simple question that changed everything. She thought about all the refugees who now had employment, dignity, and purpose because one human had been willing to look past surface damage and see the value beneath. Sometimes one chance is all anyone needs, Kessa said quietly. Sometimes, Gary agreed. But it helps when people are willing to take that chance seriously and prove everyone else wrong. He clapped her on the shoulder. You did that. You proved that the galaxy's prejudices were foolish. You showed that humans are not the only ones who can see past appearances to find real value. Through the dock window, Kessa could see Mira playing with the children of other employees. Human children, Draxian children, Quellan children, all playing together without caring about differences or disabilities. A new generation growing up without the prejudices that had made Kessa's early months on the station so painful. "We built something good here," Kessa said. "We did," Gary replied. "And we are just getting started." That night, Kessa sat with Mira in their new apartment in the residential sector. Not the refugee shelter, but a real home with 2 bedrooms and a view of the stars. Mira was doing homework while Kessa reviewed technical specifications for a new contract. "Mama," Mira said suddenly, "are you happy now?" Kessa looked at her daughter, at the comfortable home around them, at the work tablet showing jobs they were qualified for and respected for completing. She thought about Gary's partnership, about the employees who now had hope because someone had given them a chance, about the life they had built from nothing. "Yes, little star," Kessa said. "I am happy now." And she was. Not because the galaxy had changed its prejudices overnight. Not because everyone suddenly valued capability over appearance. But because one human had asked a simple question and given her the chance to prove her worth. Because she had taken that chance and shown what was possible. Because she and Gary together had created a place where others could do the same. The galaxy still had far to go. Prejudice and discrimination still existed on every station and every world. But here, in Dock 17 on Port Ganymede Station, a one-eyed, one-armed Velthani engineer worked alongside humans and aliens of every kind, proving every day that capability mattered more than appearance. And that, Kessa thought as she returned to her work, was a beginning worth celebrating.